Damn it, Joerg. You're really trying to destroy the planet, aren't you? Just wait until the Daily Fail finds out about this. Pommel launching sword. Safety is really not a concern on the Slingshot channel, is it? I mean, he almost turned himself into a eunuch with that pommel. At least he didn't use a spike for that. Anyway, pretty interesting idea. I wasn't sure if he could pull it off, but he did. We talked about that when exchanging emails about the dagger, and he brought up the idea of a pommel launching sword. So I also came up with my own design just for fun. And the way I envisioned it was a fake sword, actually, in a scabbard, so there wouldn't be an actual blade. But there would be an air tank hidden in the scabbard with a barrel going all the way through the scabbard and the guard and through the grip like a tang pretty much, and it would have a pommel at the end, and then the part of the grip could be the trigger mechanism, so you would just kind of use that like a crossbow trigger, would just fold that in to shoot the pommel. But of course, that would be a much more challenging thing to build. You know, trying to keep that airtight would be very difficult. And also that could run into legal problems in Germany where he is. Well, possibly in Canada too, I'm not sure about that. Depends on the pressure. Anyway, the spring-powered design that he came up with works. It can even kind of be used as a sword, even though, as said, he almost smashed his trunk when the thing launched, when he struck something hard. So that's a bit of an issue. And of course, with this additional mechanism, it makes the sword way heavier and also compromises the structural integrity compared to a standard sword. The power of the thing, I was surprised at how well the spike version actually flies. It seems to fly pretty far and very stable. So that actually works reasonably well. The round pommel, not so much. It actually looked like the throw would actually have more power than the launch from the sword. So, yeah, would it be effective? I don't really think so. I mean, maybe as a distraction, just like the original pommel throw is intended. I made another video about that not long ago, and I now think that it might be actually a little more sensical than I initially thought, as a distraction. And in that particular context, the judicial duel, it makes some kind of sense. Also taking into consideration that the threads would have fewer windings and all that. I talked about that in the video. It will be linked down below. So yeah, as far as the function is concerned of something like that, combination weapons have come up in history. Quite a number, in fact. Never really mainstream stuff that was commonly in use. They were always a rarity, and you can tell why. I mean, combination weapons generally have the problem that they don't do either of the functions that are combined into them as well as separate dedicated tools. For example, if you have an axe with a flintlock mechanism and a barrel attached to it, it's not going to point and aim as well as a flintlock pistol, and the barrel is probably also not going to be as large, so you get some limitations with the power. And it's not going to handle as well as a standard axe because of that much extra weight and bulk, which changes the balance and all of that. So it's going to somewhat suck as an axe and somewhat suck as a pistol, even though it can do both. There are also knife pistols like this, which, are probably reasonably effective. Again, not as good as a regular knife or short sword, but definitely not much worse than a standard pistol, just heavier, just a little more awkward. And there are also more ridiculous versions, though, like the lantern shield that I talked about, that is cramming so many functions into a single thing that it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And there were also other cases, like this crossbow sword, for example, which is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, sure, they made it in history, it's in a museum, but that doesn't mean that it was actually functional, that it was actually used. Sometimes they just messed around. In this case, I can only imagine that it was kind of an art project, perhaps, because there's no way that this thing would be halfway practical. I mean, for one, as a crossbow, it would be really bad, because the prod is a lot weaker due to the way it's attached there. Also, the string is really oddly slack and loose there. So this really wouldn't have much draw weight and wouldn't be very effective as a crossbow. And as a sword, it would be even worse, in fact, because you've got all this extra metal on there that will make it very unwieldy compared to a standard sword. And then you've got all the extra parts that can be struck and knocked loose. And of course, you only have this short section of blade beyond the crossbow prods that is usable. So I'm not even sure you can cut with that properly. It's really not much to work with. So it would just be for thrusting, and even then it's limited to this short section of blade. So it seems like a terrible, terrible idea. But they did it anyway, because they could. So yeah, that's generally the problem with combination weapons. That also applies in this case. You just take two things or more, 3 or 4 or however many, and you smoosh them together and you come up with this thing that is just a compromise at everything. It doesn't do any of the functions as well as the original things. But it's still fun. So I understand why people occasionally came up with them. And it's very tempting to do that. I'm, in fact, currently working on a design for a combination weapon that has several functions. And of course, you've seen the Scissor / Pata thing that I showed recently, which also has multiple functions. And yeah, that one is mostly functional, even though not perfect. Anyway, that's all I had to say about this right now, so thanks for watching.